A surge in measles in Pakistan claims the lives of hundreds of children. But aid workers are fighting more than just the disease. We're on the front line of a battle against mistrust, deep-rooted suspicion and deadly attacks. This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Laura Kyle. Welcome to the programme. A major immunisation programme is underway in Pakistan to combat a big rise in the number of people with measles. The immediate challenge is to vaccinate almost 3 million people in the worst affected areas. But it's an enormous task and a dangerous one. Aid workers involved in vaccinations are being threatened, attacked and even shot dead by armed groups who suspect the programmes are meant to harm them. We'll also be talking about how the CIA used a phony vaccination programme to try and catch Osama bin Laden. Well, first, let's look at some of the latest figures from the World Health Organization. We can show the number of measles cases in Pakistan has increased from 4,000 in 2011 to 14,000 in 2012. Now, of those, 306 died last year. That was up from just 64 in 2011. The worst hit area in the southern Sindh province, where 210 people have died, almost half of them in December alone. And another big rise from 2011 when 28 children died in Sindh. Osama bin Javed brings us more on this story from a hospital in Sindh province.
We are in Gul Mohammad Khoso village, which constitutes of about 400 houses. As you can see, there are lots of children here, and there are at least 250 cases that have been reported. It's absolutely abject poverty, as you can see around us, where cattle is mixed with the inhabitants of these houses. We've just spoken to a mother of 3 who's told us that all of her children have measles, but she cannot afford to provide for them. She cannot take them to the doctor. There are at least 7 deaths that have been reported in this village. The people that we've spoken to say that their children have been ill for between 10 to 12 days, and if they hadn't been treated, some of them have died. We've also spoken to one mother who told us about how her son died. Let's hear what she had to say.
My 4-year-old child died from the disease. He was sick for 12 days. His mouth was closed, he couldn't open his eyes, and there was fluid coming out of them. We tried everything, but he stopped eating. Then we saw the measles on his body. We even went to the specialist, but he died in hospital.
A majority of the dozens of children around us have the symptoms of measles. They have fever, they have cough, and they've got rash all over their body. Now, there is some discrepancy about the number of children who've died in this recent outbreak, but the World Health Organization and the government agrees that it's been more than 100 children who have died.
Well, joining us now to discuss Pakistan's fight against measles and suspicion are my 2 guests. Zaid Hamid is head of the security think tank Brass Stacks and joins us from Islamabad. And in Karachi, we have Dr. Zulfikar Ahmed Bhutta, who's head of the Division of Women and Child Health at Aga Khan University. Thank you very much, gentlemen, both of you, for joining us. Dr. Bhutta, if I could start with you. We've seen in Osama's report the devastating impact that measles is having on communities in remote parts of Pakistan. Why are we seeing such a huge outbreak of measles last year?
Well, this is a tragedy that was waiting to happen. I mean, we've been predicting for a while now that without adequate cover with routine immunization in many parts of Pakistan, notably in rural populations, that there was bound to be a situation where you would have an outbreak like this, and a disorder like measles, which has been eliminated in many parts of the region, would lead to severe consequences such as the deaths that you're seeing in front of you. I think one complication that has probably compounded what we are seeing in Pakistan this year is the fact that there was devolution last year, perhaps an ill-prepared devolution of health as a subject to the provinces, without adequate preparation and therefore transition of services, particularly to the provinces in terms of programs such as the expanded program of immunizations. So what we are seeing this year is an absolute reflection of dropping the ball on covering an adequate cohort of children in rural and poor populations of Pakistan, particularly in the south, against a completely preventable disorder like measles.
I just want to look a little bit more at Sindh itself. Are there other reasons, perhaps, as well, beside the lack of vaccinations that have led to this increased number of measles amongst children? I mean, this is a province that's been particularly badly hit by floods, isn't it, and has lost lots of its infrastructure.
I think one contributing factor to this could have been the massive rates of malnutrition that have been noticed in Sindh, which probably lead to reduced immunity and perhaps adverse consequences of the disease itself. But other than the fact that these children have been affected by a disease which is completely preventable and has been prevented in many parts of the world, including Afghanistan, which has much less strong infrastructure and human resources than we have, puts the blame squarely and fully in the lap of routine immunization systems. So I think there is nothing different in Sindh other than the fact that the health services, in particular in rural populations of Sindh, particularly in the northern parts of the province, have been unable to provide adequate protection to many children. And it could be possibly that many of these are affected by the floods of 2010 and 11, but the distribution of diseases in the districts of Sindh belies that. These are much more mainstream districts which have just seen a massive failure of public health preventive programs.
Zaid Hamid, do you agree with that? Do you believe that the blame lies squarely with a lack of local governance?
You see, the fact is that Pakistan, being a security analyst, I can take the other dimension of the issue as well, that Pakistan right now is facing a collapse on all axes of national security, all axes of economy, all axes of social infrastructure. The Supreme Court itself has said that the government of Balochistan has failed constitutionally. The government does not exist in a province which constitutes about 42% of Pakistan. As far as the law and order situation is concerned, Karachi, the largest city of Pakistan, the entire government infrastructure has collapsed in Karachi to prevent the urban gang wars. And every day there are dozens of people being killed, bomb explosions, mob violence, and kidnappings for ransoms. And similarly, the state in the province of NWFP, in the frontier province. So it's not just the collapse of the health department or the immunization campaign. The entire state infrastructure is collapsing under this existential war that Pakistan is facing. And immunization would be one aspect of it, which itself suffers due to this so-called war on terror in which Pakistan finds, which we'll discuss later.
We will broaden it out a little later. I want to highlight how important vaccinations are to controlling measles and take a little bit more of a look at the disease itself. In the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF says measles is still the leading cause of death amongst young children. It is actually a highly contagious virus and infects the respiratory system. It's passed on by coughing and sneezing and close personal contact, but of course it can be prevented. Vaccination programs worldwide resulted in a 74% drop in measles deaths between the year 2000 and 2010. In 2000, there were more than 500,000 deaths, and 10 years on, that figure was down to 139,000. Zaid Hamid, the figures there speak for themselves, don't they? Vaccination really is the key to eradicating this disease.
See, what the government has done is basically they have committed a vaccination suicide themselves. The fact is that in Pakistan, there's a very strong perception, which is backed by facts on ground, that this vaccination campaign in Pakistan has been used by CIA and foreign secret services for espionage and spying. When these facts were identified, when they were known to the public, the rage and anger in the nation was palpable. There is general rage and anger against the Americans because of the insurgencies and war that Pakistan is facing. The drone strikes that is taking place, mainstream political parties are taking the American drone strikes on Pakistan, which are supposed to be targeted against selective Al-Qaeda operatives, and they're taking this as a main political issue. So anger and rage was extremely high in Pakistan anyways. And when it was determined that the entire immunization campaign was actually hijacked by CIA for espionage which was used especially in hunting Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, where a director of the entire immunization program is still under custody and facing treason charges, these kind of perceptions are fortified by the facts that came on ground. And as a result, the World Health Organization, ICRC, Medicine Sans Frontier, American CIA has committed the greatest disservice to humanity by using these humanitarian programs for spying and espionage against the state of Pakistan.
Okay, let's just remind our viewers of the event that you're talking about and why many people in Pakistan may be suspicious of vaccination programs. And what you mentioned there, Zaid Hamid, was back in 2010, the CIA setting up a phony vaccination drive. It was supposed to be against hepatitis B, but in fact it was to help track Osama bin Laden. Pakistani doctor was recruited to carry out the work in poor villages, but his main goal was to gain entry to the compound where bin Laden was suspected of hiding. He was supposed to get DNA samples from those living there. The programme apparently failed, and that doctor is now serving 33 years for treason. Dr. Zulfikar Ahmed Bhutta, just how much damage did that fake CIA programme do?
While I agree with Zaid Hamid completely in that whatever was done with that false vaccination ruse and the campaign at that time did tremendous damage and was one of the most stupid things to have done at that time, I think where we need to be very careful in oversimplifying this is that I do not think that the current measles outbreak, which is what you started off with, has anything to do with that. Because I don't think in Sindh there has been any backlash in terms of refusal of vaccines, particularly injectable vaccines, in relation to that particular episode from some time ago last year. And I think what we are especially dealing with in the populations where measles outbreaks are being noticed is principally a failure of routine immunization systems. I think one needs to be very careful in generalizing and oversimplifying and placing the blame of the current dysfunction that we are seeing in the immunization program in the laps of the communities and families refusing immunizations. My group, in collaboration with others, has done 3 huge surveys on community perceptions in Fatah, in Balochistan, and in Sindh. And while we recognize that there's a lot of disinformation and misperceptions around oral polio vaccinations at times, we have seen no evidence whatsoever that there is a refusal of routine immunization systems. What you're dealing with right now in Sindh is a problem that there is community demand, but that demand is not fulfilled in many instances because vaccination centers do not have supplies or do not have vaccinators that are able to provide immunizations to those who need it most. And also, as I have mentioned, some of the determinants that have not been addressed.
We do have to move on, but you did mention that disinformation does still exist quite widely in these often remote communities. So where is that coming from?
Well, I think some of the disinformation is around the massive, unfortunate propaganda and disinformation that exists around the oral polio vaccine campaign. And it's lamentable because it's a very effective vaccine which has virtually eliminated polio virus as a disorder crippling children from virtually all over the Islamic world, with the exception of 2 countries, Nigeria, Pakistan, and parts of Afghanistan. So I think that disinformation is largely around the misperception that's been spread around oral polio vaccine and is misplaced. But there is no systematic disinformation around injectable vaccines, which are the mainstay of the routine immunization system. And that's what we are talking about around measles. And that's what I'm emphasizing again and again, that there isn't a community misperception around mistrust of vaccination systems at large. What happened was lamentable, but I don't think it's led to a campaign of refusals all over the country. We do not see it on the ground. And if that happened, we, as a public health community, civic society members, leaders like Zaid Hamid, have got to move on and make sure that we pass the message across that saving lives of children, saving lives of women, is a priority for this country, irrespective of what happened in a very misplaced, stupid manner.
OK. Zaid Hamid, do you agree with that? Do you personally agree with the vaccination campaigns that are being brought in by the WHO, by UNICEF, in correlation with the government there?
You see, the fact is, I agree to that extent that whatever is happening in Sindh regarding measles, that's more of an administrative failure. That has nothing to do with the CIA campaigns or refusal of vaccination. I agree to that part. But the fact is that while the vaccination is now more of a perception war than actually administrative effort on ground, while Pakistan is going through an existential war of survival, the fact is that massive anti-Americanism exists. Americans have not done anything to remove these fears and suspicions. Every day, whatever the Americans do in Pakistan or in the region is actually making it difficult for the immunization staff to do their duties. The perception management should have been the first step after the Abbottabad debacle, but that was not done. Government was trying to push the immunization down the throat of the people with this complete disregard of the anger, fear, and the suspicions. So while the focus was on administrative tools, there was no focus on managing the perception war or managing the suspicion. As a result, over 15 polio vaccinator volunteers have been killed in various places of the country. Then the response is not just at one location. They are being killed in Karachi, they are being killed in tribal areas all across the country. And the frequency is going to increase because it's not just a question of US or CIA spying on Muslims or spying on tribal areas as the perception is. The fact is that there are also other perceptions. For example, the American alternate media has been pouring out reports that the Melinda Gates Foundation funded, subsidized polio vaccination campaign is basically a trial run in the third world countries testing a new vaccine on the children of India and Pakistan and these regions. Okay. Now again, this may be a total misperception, but this misperception should have been handled. Without handling this, no administrative procedure on ground can work.
OK, so wherever you place the blame for this misperception, the fact is, as you say, that the Taliban has repeatedly threatened health workers involved in vaccination work. And some groups even saying these programmes are used to sterilise Muslims or cause them harm. And in the past weeks, a number of health workers have been shot dead. And it is still unclear who is behind these attacks. We've got gunmen ambushed and shooting dead 6 Pakistani women and a male doctor in northwest Pakistan on January the 1st. Those victims worked for an aid agency involved in health education and vaccinating children against polio. And just 2 weeks earlier in December, 9 health workers involved in a similar programme were shot dead in a series of attacks in Peshawar and Karachi.
We go out door to door and risk our lives to save innocent children from being permanently handicapped. For what? So that our coming generations turn out to be healthy. We work for our country and we are being rewarded in the form of death. What kind of justice is this? Why are we targeted and killed?
Well, Pakistan's parliament passed a resolution denouncing the attacks in December.
The polio workers were on their way to administer drops to our children to save them from polio. Should they have been riddled with the bullets? Why society, which religion, gives permission for such savagery? I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the resolution passed by this House is against those terrorists, against those enemies for the humanity, and not against ordinary citizens. This is for the safety of the ordinary citizens, for safeguarding the lives of ordinary Pakistanis. We have passed this for the protection of our children, for getting them out of the clutches of those terrorists who want to send them to the valley of death.
Dr. Bhutta, it's not simply, getting these vaccinations done isn't simply a case of winning a battle against poor governance and infrastructure, is it? I mean, who is responsible for these attacks?
Well, it is, quite rightly, also a battle to win hearts and minds of people. And while I agree that there is a clear need for civic society engagement, increasing community demand for preventive health strategies, let me clarify a few misperceptions here. I would agree with this have been a spontaneous uprising of public sentiment had these been killings of polio workers and other workers in some of the various security pockets which are recognized as at risk. These were not. These poor young girls who were killed, volunteers who were brutally murdered reprehensibly, were killed in some of the less secure, insecure areas. This was a clear case of targeted terrorism and killing of health workers under the so-called misguided ruse of this being a spontaneous public sentiment and uprising around this. Yesterday in Swabi, the women who were killed ruthlessly were education workers, not even health workers. So I think where I would like to draw a line, I come from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa myself, I would like to draw a line very clearly and state that we should not be, under any circumstances, equating what is happening as a very clear terrorist series of attacks on trying to derail public health programs, of scaring people against sending their young girls and volunteers into the field for public health and education. We should not confuse people by indicating that this is somehow the other a spontaneous rising of people against a public health and education program like this. This is targeted terrorism, which has to be nipped in the bud. Because today people who are targeting health workers will target education workers, will target lady doctors tomorrow. Where is the end to it?
So, I mean, let me also clarify one thing, because,
excuse me,
Okay.
If I may complete my sentence. You said earlier on that this was perhaps something that UNICEF and WHO was implementing in Pakistan. This campaign to rid Pakistan of vaccine-preventable disorders is a campaign by Pakistanis. It's a campaign by people like us who want to reduce child mortality in this country. This is not an imported agenda. This is not an agenda of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's our agenda. People who want to see a healthy Pakistan, who want to ride the tide of development in the region and see our children prosper, grow, and develop normally.
Zaid Hamid, this is a Pakistani initiative to save Pakistani children, so what's the problem with it?
You see, you don't have to convert the convert already, preach to the convert already. The fact is, as we have said, that Pakistan is in a state of war. And it's not just a question of vaccination or immunization campaign. The entire infrastructure of the state is collapsing. There are 2,000 schools in the tribal areas which have been destroyed in the last 1 year alone. Now, that is not an immunization program, but that's a war against schools. Malala student was shot. Why? Not because of immunization, but because of education. So the fact is that because the Pakistan's judicial system is not delivering, over 100,000 people have died in Pakistan in the last 10 years, but not a single terrorist has been hanged by the judicial system. The entire judicial system has collapsed. The entire provincial government of tribal area of frontier and Balochistan has collapsed. The provincial government of Sindh have collapsed, even to stop targeted killings and assassinations in the urban metropolis. So when these huge issues cannot be resolved, immunization remains a very low priority in the general hearts and minds of the people. It may be a very high priority in the minds of the health workers, but the fact is that is not the issue of the nation at the moment, which is begging for gas, for electricity, for fuel, and for food, and desperate for security. So this lopsided priority of the government, when the entire state is collapsing, but their focus remains on immunization, develops more suspicion in the rural areas where literacy rates are anyway down. So that's what we are saying. It is more of a perception war now. Lots of blunders have been done by the government, by the judiciary, by the perception management teams, by even, again, as we said, the people who use this campaign for espionage and spying. And these perceptions are so inbuilt now by mine and your talking on Al Jazeera are not going to change the perception of the men who are doing the assassinations. That will continue. The war has to turn its directions more toward the perception management than trying to push immunization in a population which is already hostile.
Okay, and it does seem that the debate will have to continue another day. We have run out of time. Many thanks today for our guests for joining us. We had Zaid Hamid in Islamabad, and in Karachi, Dr. Zulfikar Ahmed Bhutta. And thanks very much to you two for watching this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome your feedback. Do just drop us an email to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.